So great to have you with me today. We are going to talk about distraction and why I think becoming indistractable is such an important skill. Why I think it is actually the skill of the century, because there is no aspect of your life that is not uh, dependent upon your ability to harness your attention. This is truly how we choose our life. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to share my screen real quick so I can bring up some slides. And I'm going to tell you first about how I got interested in this topic of distraction. Where did this interest come from? So for me, it happened when I was with my daughter one afternoon. And my daughter and I have a great relationship. And a few years ago, this was a long time ago, actually, before I started writing my book, we had this day planned, just an afternoon where we could spend, in quality daddy-daughter time. And I remember that we had this book of activities that dads and daughters could play together. And one of the activities in the book is to ask each other this question. The question was, if you could have any superpower, what superpower would you want? What superpower would you want? And I remember that question verbatim, but I can't tell you what my daughter said because in that moment, for whatever reason, I thought it was just a good time to just check this one thing on my phone real quick. And by the time I looked up from my device, she was gone because I was sending her a very clear message that whatever was on my phone was more important than she was. And she went to go play with some toy outside. And if I'm honest with you, folks, it wasn't just with my daughter. It would happen when I would say to myself, today is going to be the day that I exercise. Today is going to be the day I eat right. And yet I didn't, and I wouldn't. Or it would happen when I would say, today's the day I'm going to work on that big project and I'm not going to I'm not going to procrastinate. Not going to get distracted. I'm going to focus. And yet somehow 20, 30, 45 minutes later, I was doing anything but the task that I said I was going to do. So if you want to get ahead in life, if you want to live the kind of life you know you are capable of living, you have got to figure out how to become indistractable. It is the skill of the century. Now, there's a lot more that I'm not going to have time to cover today, and so I invite you to check out my book. If there's more that we don't get to cover today, I can't cover in 15 minutes what took me 5 years to write in my book. But there's a lot more there, so I invite you to check out the book. But what I do want to do is give you kind of an overview of what I've learned in this 5 years of researching the psychology of distraction by starting out by answering a question I'm sure someone's going to ask is, does this apply to people with ADHD or only for people with ADHD? Yes and yes. It applies to anyone, whether you have ADHD or not. It doesn't matter. I have practitioners, hundreds of practitioners, ADHD coaches around the world servicing thousands of clients using this very book as a basis to teach people a non-pharmaceutical intervention. Remember, pills don't teach skills. Pills don't teach skills. So if we want to regain our focus, if we want to be able to live the kind of lives we know we are capable of living by fully controlling our attention, the first intervention should be a non-pharmaceutical intervention. Because listen, these pharmaceutical stimulants, whether it's Ritalin, whether it's Adderall, these things have side effects. Not that they're bad necessarily. If it's something that you have a diagnosis for, it may be a good solution. But everyone should first try non-pharmaceutical interventions because they come with no side effects. So the skills we're going to talk about very, very briefly, these are things anyone can do. But what I want you to do is to first understand why we get distracted, because many of us, we jump to saying, oh, I get distracted because I have a broken brain, or I get distracted because it's my devices, or I get distracted because of the news and the politics, whatever. And it turns out that there's a much more interesting and much more empowering reason that we get distracted, that excuse me, that when we get to the bottom of, we're capable excuse me, we're actually capable to do something about this problem. So let's start by first understanding what is distraction, starting with the fact that distraction is not a new problem. That in fact, we love to blame our devices, but it turns out that this problem is much older than just the internet or social media or YouTube. That in fact, the Greek philosopher Plato talked about this problem 2,500 years ago, 2,500 years ago. The Greek philosopher Plato was talking about akrasia in the Greek, the tendency to do things against our better interest. And so if Plato was struggling with this problem 2,500 years ago, the real source of the problem can't just be the internet or social media or YouTube. It has to have a much deeper cause. Now, what is that cause? In order to help you understand what is the deeper cause of distraction, I want to ask you a question. What is the opposite of distraction? What's the antonym, the opposite of distraction? Most people, if you ask them what is the opposite of distraction, they will tell you the opposite of distraction is focus, but it's not. The opposite of distraction is not focus. Rather, the opposite of distraction, if you look at the origin of the word, the opposite of distraction is traction. Both words come from the same Latin root, trahare, which means to pull. And you'll notice that both words end in the same 6 letters, A-C-T-I-O-N. That spells action, reminding us that distraction is not something that happens to us. It is an action that we ourselves take. But that's not how we think about distraction. We think about, oh, it's my phone that distracted me. It's my kids. It's my boss. It's the news. These things happen to us. No, distractions are actions that you yourself took. Now, this is very, very important. Traction is any action that pulls you towards what you said you were going to do, things that move you closer to your values and help you become the kind of person you want to become. Those are acts of traction. Now, as Dorothy Parker said, the time you plan to waste is not wasted time. So if you want to go on YouTube, if you want to go on social media, if you want to check out the news, fine. We need to stop vilifying and moralizing and medicalizing these things. There's nothing wrong with using any of these tools, as long as you use them according to your schedule and your values, not someone else's. Okay, certainly not the media companies. So anything you plan to do with intent in advance is traction, totally fine. Conversely, anything that is not what you plan to do, anything that pulls you away from your values, away from becoming the kind of person you want to become, those are acts of distraction. Now, many times people get confused and they say, well, if I'm doing a work-related task, that's okay. And this used to happen to me all the time. I would get into work, I would sit down at my desk, and I'd say, okay, nothing's going to distract me. I'm going to get started right away. I'm going to, the top thing on my to-do list, by the way, we can talk about why to-do lists are one of the worst things you can do for your personal productivity. We can get back to that in a minute. And I would say, okay, I'm going to work on that big thing that I've been procrastinating on. Here I go. I'm going to get started right now. But first, let me check some email, right? Let me just scroll that Slack channel. Let me just check the news. I got to be an informed citizen, don't I? And what I didn't realize is that that is the most dangerous form of distraction. The most pernicious form of distraction is the distraction that you don't even realize has taken you off track. Just because it's a work-related task doesn't mean it's not a distraction. If it's not what you said you were going to do in advance, it's just as much of a distraction as going on social media or playing Candy Crush, because it's not what you said you were going to do in advance. Okay, we've got traction, we've got distraction. Now let's talk about what prompts us towards distraction or traction. These are called triggers. First, we have what's called an external trigger. An external trigger, these are the usual suspects: the pings, the dings, the rings, anything in our outside environment that can lead us towards distraction. This is what people tend to blame, but studies find that external triggers only account for about 10% of our distractions. For example, this crazy chat function that we see happening right here, I hate it because it's this external trigger that I'm going to turn off. Actually, can I turn off? I don't know if I can turn off. Let's stop using the chat, everyone, because it is crazy distracting. It's an external trigger. Stop using the chat. If you have a question, please put it in the Q&A. Stop using the chat, please. Okay, I wish I could turn off, but I can't. So those external triggers, the pings, the dings, the rings, the notifications, those only account for about 10% of our distractions. 90% of our distractions, 90% of our distractions, it turns out, studies find, begin from within. 90% of our distractions begin from within. What does that look like? These are uncomfortable emotional states that we seek to escape. Boredom, loneliness, fatigue, uncertainty, anxiety. That is the source of 90% of our distractions. We call these internal triggers. And we have to start our journey to becoming indistractable must begin with mastering our internal triggers. Because let me tell you, folks, whether it's too much news, too much booze, too much football, too much Facebook, you will always get distracted unless you understand the root cause of the problem. So 90% of the time, the root cause of our problems, we like to blame YouTube and social media and our boss and our kids and the news and the politics, blah, blah, blah. But 90% of the time, the problem begins from within, because distraction is not a moral failing. It's not something broken about you. It's not some kind of personal fault. It's simply that you haven't learned how to deal with uncomfortable sensations in a healthy way that propels you towards traction rather than trying to escape it with distraction. So step number one to becoming indistractable is to master internal triggers, or they will become your master. Step number two is to make time for traction. What does that look like? The vast majority of people that I've worked with over the past decade that I've been doing this research into the psychology of distraction, the vast majority of people out there, maybe they have a to-do list. Again, we can talk about why to-do lists are one of the worst things you can do for your personal productivity. But when you look at their calendar, most people don't keep a time box calendar. We got to stop that. If you know you're capable of more, but you're not achieving it, if you know you could be in better shape, if you know you could get more done, maybe you have that book you've been running to write or that business you've been trying to start, and it's not happening, it's probably not happening because you're not planning your day. Why is this so important? Listen, folks, you can't call something a distraction unless you know what it distracted you from. I'm going to say that again. You cannot call something a distraction unless you know what it distracted you from. Please write this down. You cannot call something a distraction unless you know what it distracted you from. So if you have an open calendar with white space on it, with nothing planned, everything is a distraction. So that means what we have to do is to start turning our values into time. I want you to literally ask yourself, what are my values? What are values? Do you know what the definition of values are? Values are attributes of the person you want to become. Values are attributes of the person you want to become. So I should be able to look at your calendar and say, yep, I see what your values are. You've scheduled time for yourself. Do you have time for rest? Do you have time for prayer, meditation, for art, for scrolling social media, for playing video games? All of that is fine. Do it, but put it in your schedule. Then do you have time for your relationships, for your significant other, for your kids, for your best friends? Is it in your schedule? And finally, time for work. We all got to get work done. But there's two kinds of work. We have what we call reactive work, reacting to emails, reacting to notifications, reacting to taps on the shoulder from our boss. All of that is reactive work. It's part of everyone's day. But if you don't have some time in your day for what's called reflective work, the kind of work that we can only do without distraction, planning, strategizing, thinking, for God's sakes, must be planned for. And if you don't have that time in your schedule, I promise you, you're running real fast in the wrong direction. So you've got to plan that time as well. The next step to becoming indistractable, hacking back external triggers. This is where we take care of all the pings, dings, and rings. This is kindergarten stuff, right? Changing your notification settings, easy peasy. But what about email that didn't need to be sent or received? What about stupid meetings that we didn't need to go to that are nothing more than a distraction? What about kids? We love our kids, but they can be a huge source of distraction. So we've got to hack back each and every one of those external triggers. I've got dozens of different techniques for how to tackle each and every one of those triggers. People think it's like, oh, I just changed my notification settings. That's kindergarten. Everybody can do that. There's about a page on how to make an indistractable phone in my book. I also wrote about it on Medium, but anybody can do that. The much deeper, more interesting, and more important things to hack back are all these other external triggers, like meetings, like kids, like all these things that we don't think about that are not digital. So we can get into that. I want to make as much time as possible for Q&A. So we'll get to that if anybody has any specific questions. And then finally, preventing distraction with pacts. So after we've mastered the internal triggers, after we've made time for traction, after we've hacked back the external triggers, how do we prevent distraction with pacts? A pact is a pre-commitment. It's when we decide in advance that we will erect some kind of firewall against distraction. How do we do that? Well, one of the easiest ways is by using the very technology that distracts us to prevent distraction. So on my phone, I have a wonderful app called FocusMate. And this FocusMate app, sorry, that's a different app. Sorry, Forest. Forest is an app that I use on my phone. FocusMate, I use on my desktop. I can tell you about that as well. Forest, every time you open the app, you have this cute little virtual tree. And when you open this app, you see the cute little virtual tree, and you dial in how much time you want to do focused work. And then you hit plant. And when you plant that little cute virtual tree, you put down your phone. If you pick it up again while you're trying to do focused work, that cute little virtual tree dies. And you don't want to be a virtual tree murderer. So it's enough to remind you to stay on task. Now, I wanted to keep this very, very, very short. The most important thing here isn't the tactics. It's not the tips. It's not the tricks. It's not the life hacks. It's about understanding the strategy. Remember, tactics are what you do. Strategy is why you do it. So I want you to tattoo this into your brain that if you are struggling with distraction, this is how to get out of it. This is how to become indistractable. This is how to have the huge competitive advantage of being one of these people, not like most people who allow their time and attention and their lives to be controlled by others, but somebody who stands up and says, I decide how I control my time and attention because I am indistractable. So there's a lot more in the book. Tony only gave me 30 minutes and he said 15 minutes of it I have to save for Q&A. There's a lot more I want to cover, a lot more in the book. How to raise indistractable kids, how to have an indistractable workplace. All of that's in the book. I really, really hope you'll check it out. But with that, what I want to leave you with before we take questions is this reminder. We can do this. We can all get the best out of these tools without letting them get the best of us. We can all become indistractable. And with that, I would love to take your questions, but I have a quick favor to ask. If you want more slides, more information, if you'd please give me a quick assessment of what do you think about this presentation, this content. Would love to hear from you. If you can just zap this QR code on your phone, or you can go to this URL, opinion2.us, opinion2.us. Notice it's not .com, it's opinion2.us. Very short survey, only 5 questions. Would love to know what you thought of my brief presentation. And with that, I would love to take some questions. So let's see if we have any questions in the Q&A. We do. We have so many questions. Wonderful. Let's go here real quick. I'll stop sharing and allow me 1 second to just put that URL in case anyone missed that survey response opinion. Okay. And I'll also put in my blog. In case you have any questions we don't get to, now you should have that as well. I'm not sure if you got that. Did you get that? 1 second. Oh, you didn't get that. Sorry. And nirandbar.com. Okay, now it should appear for everyone. All right, let's take some questions in the Q&A. How to remain polite to other people while you have to focus on something else? Such a good question. We've all been in this very prickly situation where we are indistractable. Maybe you've read my book, you've started using these tactics in your own life, you are indistractable, but you're sitting across the table from someone who is doing this. They're on their phone as you're trying to have a conversation with them, and they keep doing that. Let me just check this one thing. How freaking annoying is that, right? It's awful. What do you do? What do you do in that situation? You can't say, hey, put down your phone. You're being very rude right now, even though it is very rude. You can't do that. So what do you do? What do you do? You ask a very sincere question. You ask a question that allows the person to have a polite escape from the phone zone. The phone zone is when you're mindlessly checking your device and you become oblivious to what's going on around you. And the question shows sincere concern because let's face it, you don't know what's on the other side of that phone. Maybe there's a crisis. Maybe there's an emergency. You just don't know. So the question you want to ask, you don't want to say, hey, get off your phone. You're being rude. The question you want to ask is, hey, I see you're on your phone. Is everything okay? See that? Is everything okay? And sincerely ask that. Because again, you don't know what's on the other side of the phone. They might be on Instagram. They might also be dealing with some kind of emergency. I was actually at a dinner with a few friends just a couple nights ago, and this happened. Okay. They didn't know that this is my specialty. This is what I do for a living. This is what I've studied for over a decade. And somebody at the table was using their phone. And I just asked this question. Hey, I see you're on your phone. Is everything okay? And he looked at me and he said, oh, yeah. Oh, yeah, everything's fine. And he put away his phone right away. Right. And in fact, afterwards, about 5 minutes later, he thanked me. He said, thank you so much for calling me out on that. I really appreciate it because now we can actually all be fully present. And this sounds weird to people. Like, how can we do this? Oh, that's so icky. I can't possibly say this to somebody. Let me give you an example of how we've already been here. Okay. When I grew up, I remember, I was born in the 1970s, but I remember the 1980s. And in the 1980s, many of you, anyone born after the 1980s is going to think this is crazy. But believe it or not, there was a time when you walked into people's living room, everybody's living room, they had an ashtray in their living room. Everybody did this. Everybody had an ashtray. Whether you smoked or not didn't matter. If someone came to your house, they just expected to have the right to light up a cigarette in your home. Can you imagine if someone came to your house and took out a pack of cigarettes and all of a sudden lit up in your living room? That would be crazy. Nobody would do that today. Why? Was there a law that was passed that said you can't smoke in people's private residence? No, there's never been such a law. What changed was that we had new norms, what's called social antibodies. So I actually remember the day that my mom said to one of her friends that came over and took out a pack of cigarettes and was about to smoke, she said, oh, I'm sorry. We are non-smokers. You see, she used that identity. We are non-smokers. If you would like to smoke, if you'd kindly go outside. And this woman was so offended. Oh, how could you tell me to go outside and smoke? This was so weird back then that anybody would say that. Just like today, it's kind of weird when somebody asks, hey, I see you're on your phone. Is everything okay? It's kind of weird, right? But is it so weird from someone who says, hey, you know what? I am indistractable. It's who I am. Is that so different from someone who says, hey, I'm vegetarian, or I wear a hijab, or whatever it is? This is who I am. I'm a non-smoker. So if you please go outside, I'm indistractable, which means I'm not going to answer my device every 30 seconds, right? That's who I am. I'm indistractable. If we're going to meet together and have a conversation over lunch, we're going to be fully present, both in body and mind. So I'm looking to you. If you're listening to this presentation, you are a future change maker. If you've listened this far, you don't even have to read the book necessarily. You can proudly call yourself indistractable. The title of the book is meant to sound like indestructible. It's your new identity. It's who you are. And start spreading the message that we can get the best of these devices without letting them get the best of us. We don't have to be scared of these devices. We don't have to vilify Mark Zuckerberg and say it's all Silicon Valley's fault. We can start taking personal responsibility right now for our actions by proudly declaring, I am indistractable. I will not let my time and attention be controlled by others. I will choose my own life. Okay, enough of that rant. What's next here? What do we got? How can we manifest? Could be the okay. How can we manifest internal triggers? Okay, so just to be clear, we're not manifesting internal triggers. Internal triggers are already there. What we're doing is dealing with internal triggers. We all feel boredom, loneliness, fatigue, uncertainty, anxiety. In fact, when we do surveys of high performers, when you look at people who are at the top of their game, people who are the best of the best in sports, in the arts, in entertainment, in business, they have the same exact internal triggers the rest of us do. They also feel uncertain and lonesome and indecisive and fatigued. They feel exactly the same way that the rest of us do. But what those high performers have that most people don't is the ability to use those internal triggers. They use those icky, sticky, uncomfortable feelings as rocket fuel to propel them towards traction. Whereas what most people do is as soon as they feel bored, they have to scroll something. As soon as they feel lonely, they have to click on the news. As soon as they're uncertain, well, they better watch something on YouTube. They can't deal with those sensations. And that's what I'm trying to teach. That's what I'm trying to impart, this skill, that when you realize this very important fact, write this down if you can. Time management is pain management. I'm going to say that again. Time management is pain management. If you don't learn how to deal with discomfort, you will never become indistractable. Guess what? Weight management. You're trying to lose a few? Weight management is pain management. You're trying to save money? Guess what? Money management is pain management. It's all about impulse control. And we learn impulse control by learning what to do with these internal triggers. So you need to have a plan in place. You need to have tools in your toolkit. Don't leave it to the last minute. Okay. Listen, the antidote to impulsiveness is forethought. I'll say it again. The antidote to impulsiveness is forethought. That if you leave these distractions to the last minute, you're going to fail. They're going to get you. If the chocolate cake is on its way to your mouth, even though you're on a diet, you're going to eat that chocolate cake. If you're trying to quit smoking, but the cigarette's in your hand, you're going to smoke it. If you sleep next to your cell phone every night, guess what? It's going to be the first thing you reach for in the morning before you even say hello to your loved one. It's too late. You left it to the last minute. But if you take steps in advance, right? The antidote to impulsiveness is forethought. If you take steps today, there is no distraction you can't overcome tomorrow. Okay, let's take another question. Let's see. For college teachers or other teaching a leading workshop, what specific tactics do you recommend for creating an indistractable learning environment? And secondly, what about online learning workshops or presentation? Okay, love the book. Thank you very much, Jeremy. I appreciate it. So for teachers, there's many things you can do. Part of it is understanding what are the internal triggers. That the internal trigger for an average student, this is why online education typically sucks, by the way, is that with online education, it's very boring, right? When you listen to somebody, some sage on a stage, blah, 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 the student is filled with these internal triggers. By the way, that's the same thing they're probably thinking in a classroom. But in a classroom setting, you have these constraints of if you get up and walk away, the teacher's going to see you and you're going to have to walk by a bunch of students. But without that constraint, an online learning environment is just super boring. So what we need to do is adapt to the students with new technologies, not just port over a video of somebody yabbing all the time, which is crazy boring. This is where AI comes in. This is where cohort-based learning comes in so that people interact with each other and hold themselves accountable. All right, what else do we have here? You said you were going to talk about why you think to-do lists are not advisable. Let's talk about that. Why do to-do lists suck? Now, I used to be a to-do list devotee, and when I started doing this research around distraction, I found that one of the things that shocked me is that there is almost no good research about concluding that to-do lists work. Do you know that? There's very little research that shows that to-do lists are effective. And here's some of the reasons why to-do lists are awful. And just to be clear, putting things outside of your brain and on a piece of paper, that's a great idea. Okay, you want to get things out of your brain and write them down, put them in an app so that you remember them for later. That's a great idea. What I'm talking about is when people use to-do lists as a time management technique. If you wake up in the morning and you look at your to-do list, and your to-do list is supposed to tell you what to do next, you've already lost. Terrible. Awful, awful, awful. Why? Number one, when you look at a to-do list, it doesn't tell you priorities, right? There's no constraints with a to-do list. You just have more and more and more and more and more things you can add to a to-do list. A to-do list is bottomless. So what do people do when they look at a to-do list? I'll tell you what I used to do when I looked at a to-do list. I would do the easy stuff. I would do the fun stuff. I would do the urgent stuff, not the important and hard work I had to do to move my life and career forward. So only when you use a time box calendar, which uses the most well-studied, most validated psychological principle around time management, which is setting an implementation intention, which is just a fancy way of saying planning out what you're going to do and when you're going to do it. When you use a time box calendar, and I teach you exactly how to do this in my book, Indistractable, now you have a prioritization system. Why? Because there's only 24 hours in a day. Unlike with a to-do list that you just can add more and more and more and more. And here's what happens with a to-do list. I used to use a to-do list and come home from work and I'd be exhausted. I had a super long day. Oh, I feel so tired. And I'd look at this to-do list and I'd have this list of all these things I didn't get done. So what does that do to your psyche? If day after day, week after week, month after month, year after year, you said you were going to do all this stuff on the to-do list and you didn't do it, loser. And so that starts to take a mental toll. And then you hear people saying all kinds of stupid stuff like, oh, I must not be any good at time management. Or maybe I have some kind of undiagnosed problem with my brain. Or maybe I'm broken somehow. No, you're not broken. It's a stupid time management technique we keep using that's broken. So rather than an unlimited list of things that I got to get done, what you need to do is have a time box calendar that forces you to make trade-offs. A time box calendar is the only way you can say to yourself, okay, do I want more time at work, more time with my kids, more time on project A or more time on project B, more time on social media or more time at the gym? It's only with the time box calendar that you can do that. And finally, one of the worst things about a to-do list is that a to-do list gives you no feedback, okay? And this is what we call the planning fallacy. Did you know that the average person takes 3 times longer to finish a task than they plan? 3 times longer. Why? Because here's what happens when you use a to-do list. Okay, I'm going to start on that task. Here I go. I'm going to get started. I'm working on this task. And, oh, you know what? Let me just check email for a quick minute. And, you know, I could really use a cup of coffee. I'm going to go get a cup of coffee. Hey, Janet is at the water cooler. Look at that. Hey, Janet's here. Oh, great. Wait, what was I working on again? I forgot. Because a to-do list uses this principle of measuring yourself, your self-worth, based on how many stupid little boxes you checked off. Stop it. Stop it. The right metric of success is not stupid little boxes. That's dumb. I'll tell you why it's so dumb. I used to, I'm embarrassed to admit this. I would finish a task, realize I hadn't written it on my to-do list, and I would go back and write it on my to-do list just so I can check off that stupid box. How dumb is that? Rather, the new metric that you're going to use from today on is not how many cute little boxes I checked off. It's, did I do what I said I was going to do for as long as I said I would without distraction? I'll say it again. Did I do what I said I was going to do for as long as I said I would without distraction? That's it. That's it. It's not did I finish. It's not did I finish. Because people who use this methodology that I describe in Indistractable, when you just say, I'm only going to work on this task for as long as I said I would with no distraction, now you have a feedback loop. Because I could say, okay, I'm going to work on this presentation that I'm going to make, and I need to make 30 slides. And in 30 minutes without distraction, look at that. I got done 3 slides. So that means to finish the entire presentation, I need 9 more time boxes to finish the 30 slides. You see how that works? Only a time box calendar using the Indistractable methodology can give you that. And now you're starting to get better at actually predicting how long things take. So I think I made a pretty good case for why to-do lists are awful and time box calendars eat them for breakfast. All right. What else do we got here? Anonymous says, I don't get distracted by anything on my phone other than reading manga and Pinterest. I do get inspired by these activities a lot, and I still takes time for my priority task. I understand the issue, but still can't get out of it. What do I do? Okay, here we go. I got you. There is nothing wrong with Pinterest or YouTube or manga or whatever you want to do with your time. Stop listening to these idiots that tell you social media is rotting your brain and stop using technology. And this is a waste of time and this is not a waste of time. Why is somehow Pinterest inferior to watching golf on TV? What's the difference? Well, when's the last time you said, oh my God, golf is so addictive. Everybody should stop watching golf on TV. Hey, it's silly. If you want to go on Pinterest, go on Pinterest. Enjoy it. But here's the key. Schedule it. Schedule it. Put time in your calendar to do it. Why is this so important? 2 reasons. Number one, you know how much time you're going to do it in accordance with your values. So if you say to yourself, you know what, I love going on Pinterest or YouTube or whatever, manga, whatever, I hope I'm saying that right, whatever it is that you love doing, when you know, hey, I'm only going to spend 45 minutes a day or an hour a day or 2 hours, whatever amount of time in advance, I know that's how much time I'm going to spend on it. Now you are living in accordance with your values. The person you want to become spends an hour a day on Pinterest. Wonderful. Nothing wrong with that. The second reason this is so effective to actually schedule it is that now you don't have to ruminate about it. Now you don't have to think, oh boy, I'd really love to go on Pinterest right now. When do I get to go on it? When do I get to check? When do I get to check? You know when you're going to check. It's in your calendar. So there's nothing wrong with the behavior itself. What's wrong is that you haven't made that time by turning your values into time on your time box schedule. All right, what else we got? What tips do you have for fruitfully using a service like FocusMate or having someone else like a spouse or partner help you to be accountable? Absolutely. So having an accountability partner, this is called a social pact. Remember we talked about step 4 about having a pact, making a pact. So when you have a pact with another person that can help you hold you accountable, you can use focusmate.com. It's a company that I invested in because I liked it so much. And all it does is basically assign you a partner to do focus work with. And it's somebody somewhere on the internet. You say, okay, so for me, for example, I have trouble getting started in the morning. For me, sitting down at my desk and getting started at 8 a.m., sometimes I want to go get another cup of coffee or do something else. But knowing that I have an accountability partner waiting there for me is very, very helpful. So you can do this with a real person in the real world. You can go online and get somebody in the virtual world. That's fine too. The idea here, though, is that you have that accountability partner and that you're making a pact with that other person. Very, very effective technique. But I will warn you, you have to do the other 3 steps first. If you don't first master internal triggers, make time for traction, and hack back the external triggers, step number 4 won't work. You have to do those first 3 steps first. Okay, let's see. I'm just going to take, there's so many wonderful questions here. I'm so glad everybody is here and still tuned in. I'm going to keep answering questions until I get tired or you stop asking questions. So let's see here. Let's see. Oh, I got a question again about the survey. So let me put that back in the chat. Give me just 1 second, everybody. Where is the chat? Okay. Does everybody see that opinion 2.us? I see it there. Hopefully you do as well. Can someone comment in the chat if you still see the URL, if you want me to repost it? Okay. The FocusMate, somebody asked, what is the FocusMate URL? I'll put that in, focusmate.com. Can you all see can you see this? Can somebody tell me some feedback? Huh. Not seeing any feedback here, but hopefully you are. Okay. Let's see if we can take some more questions. Ruth actually has her hand up. I'm going to let Ruth ask her question live. Ruth, can you hear me? Ruth? No? Okay, if anybody wants to ask their question live, oh, here's Tina. Let's get back to Tina. She has her hand up.
Hello, can you hear me now? Hello?
Yes, Tina, go ahead. Hi, Tina.
Hello there. Yeah, I was going to go in the chat box, but it says the chat has been disabled.
Oh, okay. Well, that would explain it, wouldn't it?
Yeah, that was it.
Pennies can chat with everyone. Okay, here we go. Now the chat's back on.
That's great. Lovely.
Perfect. Okay. Did you have a question as well, Tina?
Well, can you hear me?
Yes.
Well, except I find you were mentioning before about writing lists, which I've been doing for many years. But I've also learned another strategy, and you mentioned about prioritizing your tasks that you need to do. And I find that really helpful in terms of categorizing, so that you're always, but I often find by doing that I'm always doing the most important thing, and I leave a lot of things, because there's only, as you say, there's only 24 hours in a day.
Mhm.
So it is a challenge to be able to complete those all of the tasks, but you have to sort of also be patient with yourself. So it's a balancing act, really.
Right.
I
And again, I think the important thing here is to not measure yourself by how much you finish. That is a recipe for
Yeah,
disaster. Why? Because when you get to that time box and you haven't finished the task, the impulse is to keep working. Big mistake. Don't do that.
yeah,
Stop at the end of the time box. Why? Because if you don't, your entire day is wrecked. Whereas
yes,
when you say to yourself, I'm just going to focus on this one task for 30
mm,
minutes, 45 minutes, an hour, however long you say you want to go for, how
mm.
much did I get done? Now you have a feedback mechanism. And guess what? Tomorrow, you can make more time for that task. That's fine. You can always change your schedule for the next day. You can't do it for the current day. So that's a really revolutionary way to look at this stuff. It's not about finishing the task. It's about learning to work without distraction. Because the most important thing, the gift that I want to give everyone listening, if you can build agency in yourself to realize you can manage your time, you can manage distraction, you can become indistractable. That sense of agency is what I want to build. Once you have that, you've won the war. Distraction doesn't stand a chance. It's when we think, well, there's nothing I can do. Technology is hacking my brain. I'll never get this task done. My brain is probably broken. Whatever. Then you've lost. But when you believe in your own agency, there's nothing you can't. No distraction you can't overcome.
Yeah. I think that's really important to know yourself, to know your own boundaries, and give yourself that time, so that you don't just think
Absolutely.
work, 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 and get into workaholic mode. Yeah, I've been there. I've done that. Yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you for the question. I'm going to move on
Yeah.
here to,
Sure.
let's see. Uh, oh, sorry. I don't know how to do that, but okay, let's see. Lisa, I'm going to bring up Lisa here. Lisa, can you hear me?
Yes.
There
Hi.
you are.
Sorry, I put this question all over the place.
No
Uh,
problem. Yeah.
so I have a son who's full on adult, great human who is uh, he's having an intersection of really serious sleep problems that are wrecking his time management,
Mm,
kind of, self medicating with his favorite activities instead of, who blames him, tackling the medical establishment to try to figure out how to get help. And
yeah.
he's an adult, so I cannot do this for him. I would not do this for him. When you talk about pacts with people who are in your life, do you have an idea for like a first kind of a baby step pact for the two of us to make, that's
Mm,
respectful, that's helpful,
hmm.
that helps him build back that agency that he should have?
Yeah, yeah. So this is a great question. I appreciate the question. It's a toughie because it's very hard to make, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make them drink. It has to be something that they themselves want to do. So some tips along that path is first and foremost to lead by example. And this is for all parents out there, right? I'm a father myself. I know how much our kids mean to us. The best thing we can do is to lead by example and to be a little vulnerable, right? To say to our kids, whether they're adult kids or still children, by showing them, hey, this is something I struggle with as well, and here's what's working for me. And so in that vein, let me tell you what did work for me. So I used to have terrible insomnia, and I'll share with you what worked for me. Maybe it's useful to your son. But hopefully it's useful to someone out there. I used to really struggle from insomnia, and I did years of research into what causes insomnia. And it turns out that most cases, not all cases, but the vast majority of cases of insomnia are caused by the worry of insomnia. It's literally the worry at night. And this goes back into this idea of planning, right? When we're planning our day, I would say, my philosophy is plan everything, plan what you're going to do. So I would plan time to sleep. But here I was planning time to sleep and sleep wasn't coming, right? What do? I plan to sleep and it's not happening. So what did I do? When I learned about how important it is to stop your mind from ruminating, what happens is the number one cause of insomnia. Again, it's not for everyone, of course. I'm not a doctor. You should consult a doctor. So I'm not giving medical advice here. I'm just
Mhm.
saying statistically, this turns out to be the number one cause of insomnia is rumination. Is, oh my God, I'm not getting enough sleep, and if I don't get enough sleep, I'm not gonna be able to work tomorrow. And if I don't work tomorrow, I'm gonna be grumpy. And if I'm grumpy, here's what's gonna happen. And then and did I forget to do this? And what about that? It's all this thinking that keeps us awake longer and longer than we should be. So here was the solution that I found. The solution that I found was a simple mantra. And the mantra acknowledges that it's not your job to tell your brain to sleep on command. That's not your job. Your job is to get in bed on time. That's the number one thing you can do. Get to bed on time. Set a bedtime in your calendar. You know, my daughter said to me one time when I was berating her for saying, you need to go to bed, it's past your bedtime. And she said, Daddy, do you have a bedtime? She was absolutely right. I didn't have a bedtime. Now I have a bedtime. It's in my calendar. So getting to bed on a consistent time. And once you're in bed, if you wake up in the middle of the night or whatever and you can't fall back asleep, here's the mantra. Here's what I repeat to myself. I close my eyes and I take a deep breath and I say to myself, the body gets what the body needs if you let it. The body gets what the body needs if you let it. And so that simple mantra reminds me that, you know what? If I had a crappy night's sleep one night, I'll get good sleep the next night. It's fine. The body adjusts to itself, right? So that if you don't get enough sleep one night, you'll make up for it the next. If you let it. The if you let it part is, well, was I in bed when I said I would? Did I go to bed at 10 o'clock or 10:30 whenever I said I would? Consistently going to sleep is the best thing you can do. So after you've figured out that there's no medical problems, having some kind of practice there. Another thing that's incredibly helpful is this amazing device. So one of the things, not the book that's on it, but the device itself, the Kindle. So if you can get yourself an e-reader and download onto that e-reader some kind of mildly boring book. Okay, a mildly boring book. So for me, historical books are awesome, right? And they're great. Or philosophy books work like a charm. Why is this so fantastic? Number one, all the modern Kindles today don't have blue light, so they're not going to interfere with any kind of your normal sleep patterns. The reason that reading a slightly boring book is so effective, and it's and doing it on a Kindle versus turning on a light and reading it in a paperback is great, because then you won't wake up the person sleeping next to you. And if you did fall, if you don't have to turn on and off the light, you can just read your Kindle. What these books do for you is that they stop the rumination cycle. Because you're reading a book, you're not constantly thinking about, I can't fall asleep, I can't fall asleep, I can't fall asleep. So by getting your mind off of that rumination cycle and into a book or with a mantra like this, is that the body gets what the body needs, what if you let it, now you stop that rumination cycle, and guess what? You start falling asleep. So that's what worked for me. I'll give you one other tip, which is a smartwatch. And why is now smartwatches can go one of two ways. Some people obsess about their sleep score metrics, and that leads to certain problems. But for me, what I found is that when I wore a sleep tracking smartwatch, I realized that many times the nights that I thought I had awful sleep actually weren't so bad. And we know that your perception of sleep has a very strong placebo effect. There were studies where they took people and they told them they had a terrible night's sleep. And it turned out they actually had a really good night's sleep. And when we told people you had awful sleep, they reported being sleepy throughout the day. They were in a bad mood. They were groggy. They couldn't concentrate, even though statistically they had a great night's sleep. And then they flipped the experiment. They had a group of people who they made sure they had a terrible night's sleep. They interrupted them every few minutes. They made them roll around. They constantly gave them a bad night's sleep. And then they told them the next morning, you know what? You had a wonderful night's sleep. And guess what? They reported being alert. They weren't tired. They felt great. So we know that your perception of sleep has a very, very strong placebo effect. And so for me, at least, it turns out that with having some kind of sleep tracker, it turns out I was actually getting much better sleep than I thought I was. And so I stopped worrying so much. And when I stopped worrying, I got better sleep. So that's just a few ideas around managing these internal triggers. I hope it's somewhat helpful for you. And I wish you the best of luck. All right. Why don't we go here to Golden Johnson? Golden, can you hear me?
Hello, hi. I
Hi.
am in love with this presentation, and
Thank
I
you.
have a thing I do. One thing that I do the most is I can actually work like a machine. So I'm doing my to-do or my calendar, I would say. I'm putting time, I'm doing the things I need to get done, but I always find myself overdoing certain tasks and just going all the way throughout the day doing that same task. And I can do it for the next day and the next day after that. And it's just like maybe this perfection mode I'm in, not sure. However, I
Mm,
consider myself a highly productive person. So, how would you solve this problem? What strategies should I implement more of?
yeah. So, hey, if your life is going the way you want it to go and you feel like you're living to your full and utmost potential, you don't need my book. I admire you. I'm happy for you. Keep doing whatever it is that's working for you. But if you feel like, hey, it's a problem that I only work on one task because I'm not spending enough time in other domains of my life, I'm not exercising when I say I will, I'm not with my family as much as I think I should, I'm not doing whatever it is that is not just working all day, then there's a problem, right? Then now we're getting into the realm of, well, I'm not living to my full potential in other areas of my life. So that's where I would follow the techniques we just described around mastering the internal triggers, figuring out, wait, why is it that all I want to do is work? We tend to fetishize work in our culture as if that's not a distraction. No, if you are overworking and that is taking away from your other values, like your family, like your health, like whatever it is, other things that you want to do in your life, if working so much is taking away from those other things, well, then that is also a distraction. So just because it's work doesn't mean it's not a distraction. Is that helpful?
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
All right. My pleasure. My pleasure. All right. Let's go here to RJ. Can you hear me, RJ? Uh,
Yes, I can hear you.
Terrific.
Thank
Welcome.
you so
Can I help you?
much. And
Yeah,
for the
my
person
pleasure.
that's unmuting me.
Yes.
Um, so long time follower, dude. Been
Thanks.
reading your emails for a long time and haven't really watched any videos on you and everything, but I love both books. Um, I try to use some of the material you have along with Tiny Habits, and then uh, I'm involved with this program called ARTE with Brian Johnson.
Mm,
And he's also mentioned both, I think both of your books also. He does what's so cool for someone like me with dyslexia,
mm.
is that he does little videos and
Yeah.
audios and a 6-page summary, right?
Yeah.
And it's like
Absolutely.
cliff notes, right? And so for my question to you is, what was the pinnacle point where you used the near and far idea and made it a live item on the web and a live way of making a book? I mean, I know you probably did exactly what you've been telling us, but what
Mm.
motivated you to jump ship and I'm going to try this thing?
Yeah. So yeah, I appreciate your question. Thanks so much for following my work. So for me, so I had started two tech companies, and the second of which, it was really a tough ride. My first company was a solar energy business, and that was successful. But my second company was meh. It was okay, and there was a lot of tough times. I mean, I worked so hard. I remember at one point I got shingles, and I went to the doctor, and I was like in my late 20s, and the doctor was like, people your age should not be getting shingles. Like, what are you doing? And the fact of the matter is, I was working way too much. I was eating poorly. I wasn't exercising. I just wasn't taking care of myself. So after that company was acquired, I needed a break. And I had a friend of mine who had sold her company, and she gave me some great advice. She said, "What would you do if you know you couldn't fail and money was no object?" Okay, and I'm sure you've heard this question before, but I never really took that question seriously. And then I thought to myself, what would I do if I knew I couldn't fail and money was no object? And I realized I would learn. Like I just love learning, and I love going deep on my problems. My as an author, I didn't write Indistractable because I had the answers. I wrote Indistractable because I needed the answer. I was more distracted than anyone. It took me 5 years to write Indistractable. Guess why it took me 5 years? Because I kept getting distracted. So it wasn't until I learned these techniques for myself that I started getting control of my own life. And today I have to admit, I'm more productive than ever at work. I spend more quality time with my family than ever before. I'm in the best shape of my life at 46 years old. And so, this isn't because I have some superior genes or I'm better in any way. It's just that I do what I say I'm going to do for the first time in my life. I actually am consistent. And so all kinds of good things happen to you when you're able to do what you say you're going to do. People want to do business with people who do what they say they're going to do. People want to be friends with people who who do what they say they're going to do. So many great things have happened in my life just by the fact that I've become indistractable. And so what put me on that path of writing these books and writing on Medium almost every single week is following my curiosity. That's kind of one of my life mantras, is to follow my curiosity. What do I want to know? I think if I write about something that I'm curious about, I think that's contagious. I think the reader feels that too. And hopefully they follow me along this journey. And so hopefully everyone listening today as well, I'll put in my blog so you can follow me on my journey. I'm actually writing a third book. And so here is my website again there. I put it in the chat. If you'd like to subscribe to my blog and follow me on my journey to my next book, which is all about beliefs and how beliefs shape our reality. I'm blogging out small portions of the book, which is something actually that Medium, I give a lot of credit to Medium for helping me with this. Is that I put out my thoughts that eventually became a book. So I didn't set out to say, I'm going to write a book. I just started blogging. Just here's a question I have. I'm going to answer that question for myself. And then hopefully other people will find it interesting as well. And when you do that, week after week after week after week, guess what? You kind of become an expert on the topic. So I'm a world expert on habit forming technology, not because I'm smarter than anybody, but I just did more research into it than pretty much anybody else on earth hasn't been studying habit forming technology and distraction the way I have. There's nowhere where you can get a PhD in distraction studies, but if you think about it long enough and you research and you read all the papers you can find and all the books you can find, guess what? You get kind of good at the topic. So that's kind of always been my process. All right, let's go to David Grover. David Grover, can you hear me?
Yes, I know.
All right, terrific.
My question is on the practicalities of time boxing. I mean, do you literally box out 24 hours? And how often on a Sunday night would you do the following week? And how often after a day do you say, well, I'm going to adjust this time box and that time box based on what happened today? I'm just curious about your best advice on this sort of practicalities.
Wonderful question. Yeah. So of course, every step of the way is in the book, but I'll give you a brief overview, which is that you want to plan out as much as you have visibility into, meaning about 80% of the people that I've worked with, they do about a week's time. That's more or less, I pretty much, most knowledge workers kind of know what your week's going to look like. You have breakfast around the same time every day. Your work day is structured more or less, maybe a meeting here or there, but you kind of know what work's going to look like. So most people, about 80%, it's a week's time. They do about, 5 to 7 days in advance. Now, some people I've worked with over the years, they don't know what their day is going to look like until they get to work that day. So guess what the first order of business is for the day? Sitting down and planning out your calendar for the day. So you always want to make sure you keep your schedule for that day, for that time box calendar. You keep it as best you can. Now you're going to fall off track from time to time. That happens. I still get distracted from time to time. But the difference is between a distractible person and an indistractable person is that a distractible person keeps getting distracted by the same things again and again and again. There's a wonderful quote by Paulo Coelho who said, "A mistake repeated more than once is a decision." Isn't that a great quote? A mistake repeated more than once is a decision. So good. So a distractible person keeps getting distracted. Again, it's Facebook. Again, it's YouTube. Again, it's politics. Again, they keep getting distracted without doing anything about it. Whereas an indistractable person says, okay, you got me once. I got distracted that one time. Happens to everybody, but it's not going to happen again. Again, the antidote to impulsiveness is forethought. I'm going to take steps today to prevent getting distracted tomorrow. So what you do is when you fall off track in your calendar, no problem. You just make tomorrow's schedule easier to follow. So for example, you know what? I don't like working out in the morning. I want to work out in the evening. I don't want to have breakfast with my kids. I want to have dinner with my kids. I don't want to work. I don't want to do email first thing. I want to do whatever. You can change your schedule for the day ahead for as much as you want, right? Because your goal here, the mindset, is not to be a drill sergeant. You're not going to say, I'm going to do this and this because I said I would forever and ever. No, the idea is to be a scientist. What's the job of a scientist? A scientist makes a hypothesis, runs an experiment, looks at the result of that experiment, and then does new experiments based on those results. So what you're going to do every day is to say, okay, I set my schedule. I made a time box schedule, and this worked, but this didn't. So how can I make tomorrow's schedule easier to follow? That's the idea. Is that helpful?
Excellent. Thank you, sir.
My pleasure. Thank you. How about we go to Martin? And by the way, I'm just going to do this. No one's helping me here at Medium, so I'm just looking at the questions as quickly as I can. But I see there's so many, and so many people are still here, which is fantastic. So if you have a question, raise your hand. I'll try and get to you as quickly as I can here. Why don't we go to Martin Gasper? You with us? Martin Gasper, you here?
Yes.
Yes, terrific. Can I help you?
Oh no, sorry, there's two of us here. But my question is just, I always time box, and then throughout the day I start moving the time boxes, and the thing actually never gets done, and they kind of, the important ones end up time boxed at the end of the week, and then just don't quite get enough attention. So if you've got any tips on how to avoid doing that.
And she is Nicola,
Yes.
by the way.
Nicola, thank you for the question. So Nicola, so if I understand correctly, so some things you have no problem time boxing, other things you do have trouble sticking to while time boxing. Is that right?
Yeah, exactly. So it'll be like an important work task, and then I'll just keep moving it
Yes.
to
I know
the slot that becomes available.
Perfect. I know exactly the problem. The problem is step one. Remember, step two is making time for traction. That's step two. Step one is mastering internal triggers. I know exactly why you do this, because this is exactly what I used to do. I would say, okay, right now for the next hour and a half, I'm going to do nothing but write this next chapter. I'm going to finish my book right now. Right. Which of course is never the goal of time boxing. It's not to finish, remember, it's to work on that task without distraction. So step one is mastering the internal triggers. When I would say I'm going to write without distraction for an hour and a half, that was too much time, right? And it was stirring up way too many of these internal triggers. It's boring and it's stressful and I don't feel like doing it right now. So let me just move that time box around. And I know exactly with 100% accuracy that this is the problem, because I can see the symptom. It's not fun. It's the work-related task. The fun stuff you love doing, no problem time boxing those. It's the hard stuff, but it's the hard stuff that's the most important, right? Everything worth having in life is on the other side of discomfort. So we have to learn how to push through that discomfort enough to be able to do this important work in our life. So what I want you to make sure you have is a toolkit ready to go, so that when you're doing one of these hard tasks that you don't really feel like doing, you know what to do about those internal triggers. Can you maybe, Nicholas, share with us an example of what's one of these tasks that you don't really feel like doing, that you just kind of skip and time box it for later?
Oh, it would be something like preparing a deck for investors or something, but then instead I'll get distracted by lots of messages from my team asking for help, and then I will start helping them instead of doing the deck, and then the deck will get pushed right to the day before and I won't spend much time on it.
There we go. So did I hit the nail on the head in terms of the feelings that you have making that deck, that, ugh, this kind of sucks, it's boring, it's hard?
Yeah, maybe it's just getting started. Maybe it's a good tip that you're saying, just have a smaller time box and get going.
So having a time box that's appropriate for that task, and it could be itsy bitsy, right? It could be 10 minutes. You can do anything for 10 minutes, right? So maybe it's as little as saying, I'm going to work on this task for 10 minutes, nothing else. And then as soon as it's 10 minutes, I'm done. I'm doing something else. Because again, you're building your agency, your efficacy to say, hey, I can do this for that period of time. Also, what you want to do is to have tools in place so that when you feel that discomfort, when it gets a little hard and you feel like checking a Slack channel or responding to people on email, what are you going to do with that sensation, right? Are you going to try and escape that sensation, or do you use that sensation? So one trick that I use almost every single day, I've been a professional author now for over a decade. And believe me, when I write, all I want to do, just like you with the slides, all I want to do is just check some email or scroll a Slack channel or check the news or do anything but. So I have a couple of techniques that I use almost every single day. And one of my favorites is called the 10-minute rule. The 10-minute rule acknowledges that these uncomfortable sensations, these internal triggers, they don't stay forever. They crest and then they subside. Okay, they're like waves. And so your job is to ride that wave like a surfer on a surfboard. But that's not how we think about emotions. We think about emotions as always being there. If something's boring, it's always going to be boring. If something is uncertain or tiresome or fatiguing, it's always going to be that way. That's not the case. Emotions are fleeting. So if you can simply find ways to ride that urge like a surfer on a surfboard long enough to get back to the task, that's a very empowering technique. So here's what I do. So what I do when I'm writing, I'll set a timer for 10 minutes. Okay. And now I have a choice to make. I can either get back to the task at hand or surf the urge. Now, surfing the urge for me, I use another mantra. What's my mantra? You can steal this mantra. You can make up your own, whatever's meaningful for you. My mantra, when I just take a deep breath and I say to myself, this is what it feels like to get better. This is what it feels like to get better. And just repeating that simple mantra, reminding myself that everything worth having in life is on the other side of discomfort, right? You want to have a great career. You want to do a wonderful slide presentation. It's going to be hard, right? That's a special skill that you have. You want to have a great relationship? Yeah, I've been married for 23 years. It's not easy. You got to put in the work. You want to have wealth? It's going to take hard work. You want to have a fit body? That's going to take hard work. Everything is on the other side of discomfort. So this is what it feels like to get better. And so just saying that simple mantra a few times, and then when I'm ready, getting back to the task at hand is incredibly helpful. And you know what? Sometimes if I just say, I'm just going to surf the urge, and that 10-minute timer hits, that's okay. Now I can check email. Now I can, scroll that Slack channel. It's fine. What you don't want to do is to tell yourself, no, don't do it. That's very bad. Because we know that abstinence, in fact, can backfire. So it's much healthier you're not going to tell yourself no, you're going to tell yourself not yet. Meaning, I can go check email. I can do that. I can go scroll that Slack channel, but I choose not to for 10 minutes. And I set a timer. In 10 minutes, I can do it. Because now you're back in control. And of course, now the 10-minute rule becomes the 12-minute rule, becomes the 15-minute rule. And now you're building your agency to say, yeah, this isn't so hard. I can do this. That's the idea.
That's so helpful.
helpful?
Thank you. Yeah, really helpful.
Terrific. All right, let's go to, I'm sorry if I'm going to mispronounce his name, Mohsin Khan? Mohsin Khan, hopefully you're with us.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Thanks for the session. It's really helpful.
Sure, my pleasure.
Yeah, I just want to discuss one thing. I have noticed that I have some problem regarding a peer pressure distraction. So when I'm the solo person working on a thing, I think my performance is almost double or triple than when I'm working with others, and constantly have some peer pressure regarding it. So how to just fix this distraction? Like I'm constantly thinking about that I'm not doing well enough, and instead of focusing on the task at hand.
So you're more productive when you are working alone versus working with other people?
Yeah, exactly. So it's a kind of a peer pressure thing that which constantly distract me from working on what I want to work.
I see. So give me an example of a task that you're doing that the peer pressure distracts you from. What's an example of the task itself?
I work for an IT, like a software. I'm a software developer. So when I am the only person like doing a feature, I do it really productive and it always ahead. But whenever I will work with a team, I'm constantly like thinking that I should be better. I should be instead
And
of
what
like
do you,
working.
what's the distraction? What do you do instead of working on the thing you said you were going to do?
Yeah, exactly. It's always like whenever a Slack message comes up from a next, like my next mate, which is working with me. So I'm constantly thinking that, okay, now I have to work better. I think I'm not good enough. So that kind of peer pressure I'm feeling. So how to handle this?
Okay, fantastic. So this is wonderful evidence. I hope everyone's listening to this example. This is fantastic evidence about what I was saying before, that most distraction begins from within. Notice how do I pronounce your name? Can you pronounce it for me?
It's Mohsin Khan.
Mohsin. So what Mohsin is telling us is that the tool he uses to distract himself is Slack. But Slack is not the source of the problem. The source of the problem, the internal trigger, is this, I guess, fear, uncertainty, insecurity. It's these icky, sticky feelings that most people won't acknowledge. And Mohsin is sharing with us, right? That's the real source of distraction. It's not the tool. It's not the technology. It's the internal trigger. And if you don't solve that problem, if you don't learn methods to deal with that discomfort, it's always going to be a problem. So maybe I can give you at least one tactic that might help, which is about reimagining the trigger. And this was very effective for me. And again, I'm just going to tell you what worked for me. Hopefully it'll apply in your life as well. So a few years ago, I found when I was first starting my career that I had terrible stage fright. And stage fright is not a great thing for someone who makes their living on public speaking to have. But I noticed that every time I would get on stage, I would start feeling my heartbeat in my chest. My armpits would get sweaty. I'd get super nervous, and my mouth would get all dry and cottony. And I started telling myself, well, this is distracting me from giving my talk, and I'm going to mess up. And I started getting all nervous, and I started ruminating, and I would mess up because I was getting so agitated. And then I read this research around how we can reimagine these triggers, that it's actually our choice. You know, there's a difference between an emotion and a feeling. Most people don't realize this. There's a difference between an emotion and a feeling. An emotion is the physiological response. It's the heartbeat, it's the sweaty pits, it's the cotton mouth. I don't control that. I don't control that. All I can control is how I respond to that psychological, to that physiological reaction with feelings, how I interpret those feelings. I'm bad. This is bad. I'm catastrophized, whatever it might be. I choose how I will feel in response to these emotions. So I reimagined these triggers. What before I would think is a terrible thing, a sign that I'm no good, that I'm going to mess up in front of a crowd, I started turning into a positive. And now, guess what? I still get stage fright. In fact, I'll be totally honest with you. I have sweaty armpits and a beating heartbeat right now. I'm super nervous, right? We've got how many? 280 people tuning in right now, 278 people tuning in. That makes me nervous, right? And yet now I totally reimagine that trigger. You know what I say to myself before I'm about to get on stage? I don't say to myself, oh, I might mess up and this might mean I'm not a real good public speaker, that I feel this physiological response and I'm feeling these emotions. No, I change the conversation. Now, before I get on stage, I say to myself, oh, okay, my heart is beating so quickly so that it can pump more oxygen to my brain so I can deliver my best possible presentation. So maybe this is a solution for you as well. How can you reinterpret that competitiveness, that drive, that thinking about others away from insecurity and into a motivating factor? You're competitive. It's great to be competitive. There's nothing wrong with that, as long as you can use it as rocket fuel, use it as motivation to do your best work. So reimagine that trigger, not as something necessarily bad, but as potentially a very positive thing. And then don't stop there. Make sure you have tools in place to deal with that discomfort. Maybe use the 10-minute rule so that you're not constantly checking those channels. Schedule time to go on those Slack channels as opposed to doing it whenever you're feeling insecure. Hack back the external triggers. Turn off those stupid Slack notifications so they don't interrupt you all day long. Make a pact so that those things, you can't reach them during certain hours of the day. So follow all 4 steps. But I think the most important step is going to be dealing with those internal triggers. Is that helpful?
Thank you so much. Thank you.
My
Thank you.
pleasure. My pleasure.
That's a great perspective. Thanks.
Terrific. All right. I am, this was supposed to be a 30-minute session and now it's an hour and 7 minutes. I think Medium is going to get really mad at me if I keep going. So maybe we'll call it a day here because we've gone over an hour. Listen, everyone, I'm so glad you stuck with me. And I'm so glad that hopefully you found this helpful. Let me give you one more time my email address, and I want to give you a special treat here. So not my email, my website address. I want to give you a special treat here for everyone who's stuck around. If you go to, one second, this URL I just put in, indistractable.com. You see that URL, indistractable.com? There is a free workbook there that will help you, whether you buy the book or not. I don't really care. I just want you to become indistractable so you can spread this message. There's a free workbook there at indistractable.com that will guide you through the process of being indistractable. It's 81 pages long. It asks you these questions to prompt you to kind of work you through this exercise of becoming indistractable. It's a wonderful tool. It's there for free. It doesn't cost a dime. And hopefully you'll find that useful as well. And if you have any questions that I didn't get to answer today, if you go to my website, there's a contact form there. If you want to send me your question, I'll do my very best to get back to you. And with that, everyone, thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate it, and have a great day and stay indistractable. Thank you.